Good afternoon. It is so good to see you. Before you stand, I have one piece of trivia for you today. Who can tell me what university was established on February the 3rd? And I'll give you the year. 1834. Wake Forest University, that's exactly right, 189 years ago. Good job. They had a rough week this week. Nick Fountain is celebrating that win between Duke and Wake Forest, as well as others. Okay, now, if we will please stand, it is so good to see you. I'm happy to have every one of you here. It is a great day. Kids need Kiwanis, and Kiwanis needs you. So if you're visiting, join us, come back. We want you in our group. Kiwanis is a global organization of volunteers dedicated to improving the world, one child and one community at a time. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Clay will lead us with song, and I'm going to step away from the microphone.
All right. Last week, we had a bunch of wonderful guests here. They did pretty good with the song we're going to repeat today. And it's still in honor of what we do each year, going to the ball game over in Durham. If you will go to page 50 in the book, and song 111, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. And the pitch will be, na, 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 na. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. I see some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never get back to the rooting for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game.
Okay, Clay, that was a good idea. Better this week. Still a little work for future weeks, but yes. And thank you, Brody, for sharing our invocation.
Our invocation today is from a portion of the Psalms. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name. He made his ways known to Moses and his works to the children of Israel. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy, slow to anger, and of great kindness. He has not dealt with us according to our sins, nor rewarded us according to our wickedness. As a father cares for his children, so does the Lord care for those who fear him. For he himself knows whereof we are made. He remembers that we are but dust. But the merciful goodness of the Lord endures forever on those who fear him, and his righteousness on children's children. Amen.
So our first guest is Macy Fisher. She was here. Her daughter's in a play this afternoon, so she had to run out. But I'm excited to say she submitted her application. Not only did she submit her application, she has a guest here, Bill Burlington. Bill, will you stand? And Macy works with Wake County Attorney's Office. Bill is retired from many different times. We are happy to have him. Macy is sponsoring him. He turned in his application today. And then we have Bob Lippert, a dear friend of several in the club and mine, and he turned in his application. He's retired as well. And my husband, Roger Askew, who was supposed to be here today, turned in his application. So, yay. And now we have some more good news.
And Laura has a guest. Same one I keep bringing. Lynn is right down there, and she has joined.
Yay, we have her application. So that is 5 applications. So that is wonderful. We challenge you all to bring some more guests in and applications. Well, we know it's not complete yet. But are you willing? Are you volunteering? I'd love for you to do that.
I'll let you know.
Okay, well, you have to let us know by the 7th. Okay. Buck, will you lead us in the membership welfare? Yes, I'm sorry. Oh my gosh, and I have one more, but he did not turn in an application. I'm still working on that. And that is Bill German. Come on and stand up. Bill was here. He works with Robert and I, and he was going to surprise Tarver, but Tarver's not with us today. So we are happy to have Bill and want him to join us again.
Well, thank all of you for being here. We do appreciate it. Membership welfare. Let me share a couple of items with you. Scott Pius is recovering from COVID. We want you to remember him in your thoughts and prayers. And we had a message from Randy Hartley, and let me just share that with you. He wrote a letter. He said he had his surgery on the 24th. He received his final biopsy just a day or two ago. Turns out that the tumor he had was a rare type, but the particular one he had was high risk, although it was a rare type. They're considering a course of radiation in addition to some more surgery, and we want you all to have a word of prayer for Randy Hartley and think about him at this particular time and reach out and touch him. Are there any other announcements of membership welfare concerns? If not,
Scott, did you mention about Scott Pies?
no, I said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry. Buck told me to get started, and now I can't keep up. I know. I need to listen a little better. And the birthdays are on the board. And we had someone turn 81 years this week. So, Sanford, thank you. And thank you for greeting today. I can't find you, but I know you're here. There you go. There. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Happy birthday. Okay. Okay. Yeah. We did announce that last week. Thank you for telling us, and we will certainly keep him in our prayers and let us know how to support your family. Thank you. Greeters, Sanford, thank you for greeting today. We need 2 greeters for next week. Anybody willing to raise their hand? Oh, fantastic. Bill and Bob will be our greeters next week, so that is wonderful. Thank you. That is a great way to get to meet new members, and that is one of the requirements as a new member, so thank you. We also want to remind you to check those weekly updates. There's good information in those emails and new things coming up, so keep reading those. Andy, I want Andy to, if we're Andy. So thank you, Andy, for chairing that committee and coordinating. February the 24th, we serve at the Salvation Army. Leanne and I had the privilege and honor of doing that last Friday night. It was absolutely wonderful. If anybody is interested in serving, it's from 4:30 to 6:30 on a Friday night, a great way to start a Friday night. I know Bob Goodell would like to do it this in February, but if anybody would like to go with him, we need 1 to 2 more volunteers. Anybody interested and I can talk to you, just raise your hand and let me know. Okay, Courtney may be interested, but we definitely need 1 to 2 more volunteers. Charter night is April the 28th. We're looking forward to that. Stay tuned, more information is coming. June, and then May, Andy told you about the golf tournament, and in June we have our baseball outing. We do have a board meeting this coming up Thursday, so if there's anything you'd like to share with anyone on the board, including me, we're happy to take in those recommendations or considerations. And I think we are ready for Hall to come and introduce the speaker today, Hall Edwards.
Mark is a 5th-generation native of Raleigh. He attended NC State University, is a former U.S. Army reservist and former Raleigh police officer. He began his career at Brown-Wynne in 1994. Mark graduated Mortuary College in 97 and became a fully licensed funeral director in 98. He served on the North Carolina Board of Funeral Service for a total of 14 years, was president of the board in 2008 and 2020. He is currently a member of the Rotary Club of Raleigh and a member of Hayes Barton Baptist Church. He is a former board member of Hospice of Wake County and former board member and past president of the Raleigh Hall of Fame. Most importantly, Mark is husband to Angie and father to Virginia and Ann Blake. I'd like to introduce not only my mentor, but a great friend, Mark Blake.
Good afternoon. Thank you all. I was very fortunate about, I think you said 2016. I met Hall, who was drawn to this industry. Believe it or not, people for one reason or another go into funeral service. Either it's a calling, they grow up in it, or they find interest somehow, and you're drawn in after that. It's a very social business. It's a very rewarding business. It's a very stressful business, but it is nice to be needed, particularly by people at the worst times of their life. I did not grow up in funeral service. I did not grow up wanting to be a funeral director. I actually grew up wanting to be an astronaut. Grew up in the 70s, and Neil Armstrong was my hero, and a lot of athletic folks were my heroes. But I went into law enforcement after college and being a reservist in the Army, and I had a mentor, and also Dr. Bill Proctor talked to me one evening about going and talking to O.C. Pennington, who some of you may know in this room, who died about 7-8 years ago. He said, Mark, what are you going to do now you've left the police department? And I said, well, I'm thinking about going back to law school. And he said, listen, there are enough darn lawyers in Raleigh. You seem like a person that would be well suited for funeral service. And I didn't know how to take that. Because of course I saw people in funeral service sort of, somber and sort of dark and, morose. And I thought, I don't know if that's a compliment or not. He said, now go on down there. OC needs somebody he can mentor, and one day he's got to retire, and we'd like to know who we're dealing with when that time comes. And that was in 1994. So I went and talked to OC at Brown-Wynne, and he took me under his wing, and that was how I started. So I was very fortunate in 2016 to meet Hall, who y'all are very fortunate to have as a member. He's a very fine young man and has fallen right into our business. He is very suited for it. He's calm. He's firm, fair, and friendly. I learned those things when I was a police officer. Gene Feeney taught us that in the Raleigh Police Academy. He said, if you'll use that in anything you do, you'll come out on the winning side. And he's very good with families. I can't even begin to tell you what people say and how he makes them feel and the way he directs and guides them. So I think you have a great member in Hall, so thank you. I'm not going to just sit here and promote Brown-Wynne because I don't want it to seem like I'm being invited for that reason, but I am very proud to work for them. I started there in 94. My father actually graduated high school with Bob Wynne in 1955 from Broughton High School, so I've known the Wynnes most of my life. But we are the Raleigh's oldest business. We are 187 years old. We were started by the Brown family that were chair makers from Petersburg, Virginia. Joel Brown came to Raleigh in 1818 and opened a Windsor chair manufactory on Hillsborough Street. We found documentation of that, and they made Windsor chairs and furniture for the State House and the legislature. And he had a son named Henry who had the initials HJ, and he learned the trade of cabinet making, and in 1836 they incorporated and became H.J. Brown Coffin House. And that's how they started. And there were 3 generations of Browns, and then in 1939 the Wynne family that were related by marriage, Robert Wynne, bought the business when Fab Brown died. And at that time they were located on Hillsborough Street in a Victorian house next to Good Shepherd. And then there were 2 generations of Wynnes. I make don't hide this fact. In 1991, Mr. Wynne did sell the business to Service Corporation International in Houston, Texas, and they are my employer and Hall's employer. And they are the largest funeral company in the United States, actually North America, with over 2,200 funeral homes and cemeteries throughout North America. But I first and foremost work for Brown-Wynne, and we try to uphold the traditions and the legacy of what all those people who worked for us for 187 years have done. And most importantly, the expectation of the public and the citizens of Raleigh that they've had in us for that long. And that's a lot of responsibility. What we offer people are three things: trust, convenience, and service at a very difficult time. And our business has changed a lot in the past 29 years that I've been employed there. And COVID particularly changed a lot of what families expect and how people grieve and how people celebrate other people's lives. There's a small firm in London, Leverton and Sons, and they are the Royal Undertakers, and they're a small family-owned funeral home. And during the Queen's funeral and all during that week, I saw an article that was written about her casket and how it had been in storage for a number of years and how it was made. And Mr. Leverton said something that resonated with me as a funeral director. He said that we are in the business of honoring lives by respecting the dead. And that's what we do. And it's very rewarding work, and it's very challenging work at times. I often say those of us in funeral service are like a duck on a pond. We look very nice and calm and serene on top, but underneath at times we are paddling like crazy. We have 6 funeral homes, and we serve about 1,700 families a year. So there are a lot of things that go on behind the scenes. A lot of logistics, a lot of employees, support staff, a lot of people behind the scenes that do things at times that are not very pleasant, that are not very rewarding at times, but they are part or an extension of what Hall and I do, which are meet with families and guide them from when a death occurs until a funeral or memorial service has ended. But that doesn't end our relationship. There are many people in this room that I've served personally, that Brown-Wynne has served for a long time. And we're very fortunate and thankful that they continue to come back to us generation after generation. And that's the trust aspect of what we do. And that's why I think Hall and I do it, because that means a lot. You're not going to become wealthy. Your hours are very long. You're away from your home a lot, away from your family. Fortunately, both my girls that are 21 and 24 did not elect to go in funeral service. One is in college athletics, and the other one is still in college studying to be a nurse. But they appreciate what I do, and I think it's kept them grounded, because I don't talk a lot about death and the sadness of what we deal with, but I talk about the real life aspects and the fundamental things that I have learned in not being too frivolous about things and not take things too serious, but understand that life is about consequences and choices and sometimes sadness. But at the same time, we are about celebrating people and helping them through a difficult aspect. One thing OC taught me was try to make it as simple and as easy on a family as it can be. Because the last place they want to be is a funeral home, and the last people they want to deal with are funeral directors. But we have a job to do, and he taught me also a thing called unobtrusive excellence. I am the funeral and memorial are not about me. They're not about us. They're about the family. They're about the person we're honoring, and we take that very serious. And so we're sort of like a chameleon. Sort of like the furniture or the wallpaper. I'm there. You know I'm there, but I'm not going to step forward till you need me. And as long as we do that, I think we do a pretty good job. I was very fortunate in 2005 to be appointed to the state mortuary board. By then, I believe it was Governor Easley. And and I've been appointed by 3 other governors, and I've served for a combination of 14 years. And that gave me another view of funeral service from a larger and higher level. And we are the licensing board and regulatory board that oversees all funeral homes in North Carolina. We are fee driven. We do not take taxpayers' money. We are not driven by any fees from the legislature. We are all internally driven by fees in our industry. But we do oversee the disciplinary aspect of our business. We oversee the licensing. We oversee interns. We oversee, most importantly, when people pre-fund their funerals, called inflation-proof insurance, or pre-planning your funeral. And that's one big thing I wanted to talk about today, because, you know, everybody in this room, whether we like it or not, have something in common, and that is that we're going to pass away at some point. And we really should have conversations with our loved ones. Funerals are not necessarily about the dead. They are about the living, and they are for the living. They're to honor people that have died. But I say that because sometimes we're amazed that people call us, and you know, someone may be in their late 90s, and they say, you know, I just cannot believe Mother passed away. I remember talking to a young lady, her mother was 99, and she said she'd never had a discussion of what her mother wanted. And I understand that on a certain level, because it's a hard conversation to have. It's the last thing we want to discuss, but it is a real gift. I have had families that have pre-planned their funeral in some aspect, and it has really given a peace of mind to those that are surviving. And so I highly encourage you to do that on some level, whether that's completely coming into your funeral home of choice, whether it be us or whether whomever it may be. But sit down and make those prearrangements. There is a financial opportunity. It's a wise thing to do to pay for it, because it is inflation proof and it is guaranteed. It's your money. It's not the funeral home's money. They cannot intermingle it with their operating funds. It is assigned to the funeral home at death. And that money does gain interest, but the funeral home has the right to retain that interest. That's the only way they can offer inflation-proof insurance. But it does guarantee that your funeral wishes are paid for in advance. And Hall and I see where today sometimes families have financial constraints, or they may not be able to access those monies when a death occurs for one reason or another. And we see the benefit when families have prearranged that financially, because used to be years ago, you know, funeral homes could wait 30, 60, 90 days to be paid. That no longer is the case. Like any other business, it's extremely expensive to operate our businesses. And in order to do that, we require payment within a set amount of time, usually about 10 days. So that's yet another reason to pre-plan or pre-fund your funerals. Your money is protected by the State Mortuary Board. When you pre-arrange for a funeral, you pay a $20 filing fee with the State Board, and that is for oversight and to register your pre-need, which is kept on file with the State Board. And on a yearly basis, every funeral home that sells pre-arranged or pre-need funerals has to keep track of that through an annual report. And that money goes to a recovery fund, so that if a funeral home did abscond or money was taken, then the State Board would reimburse you with interest through that recovery fund. And right now we've got about $650,000 in that fund. But that could be wiped out very quickly. There was a case in West Virginia about 4 years ago where a funeral home was writing trust pre-need, which I don't encourage, because a funeral home could have, they could access that trust versus a separate insurance policy. What he did, there were 77 contracts that he was not filing with the West Virginia Board, and he was using that money to pay his employees or live a lavish lifestyle. I don't know what he was doing, but he got caught, and it was in excess of $1 million. So you can see how that recovery fund could be wiped out very quickly. And about every 3 or 4 years, we catch a funeral home or funeral service not doing the right thing. And it always would give me great pleasure to put them out of business and then turn them over to the local district attorney. Because nothing is worse than someone in our business taking advantage of the public. And no one loathes or dislikes it any more than those of us that have sacrificed and given to our trade than somebody taking advantage of the public, particularly during such a vulnerable time. So I reassure you that our state board is a solid board. It's needed. There are 9 members. 7 are licensed in the state, and then 2, 1 through the Senate, 1 through the House, are public members, and they meet once a month. And we have a staff of about 15, and we have 5 inspectors that are out in the field inspecting funeral homes and crematories on a regular basis. When I mention crematories, I think it's important that you know that cremation is nationally about 55%. About 4 years ago, it reached that level. We at Brown-Wynne, our location downtown is about 75% cremation. And when I started in 1994, it was about 20%. Bob Wynne put in the first crematory in 1981, and he sort of saw a growing trend. And that is now here and is very much probably more of a part of what we do on a daily basis than anything else. And there are more legalities with cremation than burial, believe it or not. Unfortunately, today, a lot of families are fractured and not whole. I hate to say that, but that's reality. And there are times we go in the room with a family unit and I want to run out the other door as fast as I can because you can feel the tension. Or they'll tell you real quickly who they like or who they don't like or who's been taking care of their mother, who hadn't been. The law and the legislature was very wise about 8-9 years ago to create a law that gave the hierarchy as far as the order of who has the ultimate say in taking care or deciding the disposition of their loved one as a healthcare power of attorney. And we cannot advocate enough that if someone doesn't have family or if they do not trust their family, to carry out their wishes to have documents drawn up. A durable power of attorney or general power of attorney is more for financial reasons at the end of somebody's life. And that ends at death. And that really doesn't have any bearing on what we do. But a healthcare power of attorney does. There is a paragraph, usually on the 2nd or 3rd page, if it's drawn up by an attorney, that says that that person has the right to choose the disposition of my remains. And that's what we look to. So if somebody has 5 brothers or sisters left and they haven't talked to them in years, but they've got that healthcare power of attorney, then that person can sign to authorize their cremation. If they don't, then we have to, by law, have 3 out of the 5 sign. And sometimes if they're estranged or haven't been in touch in years, we may have to wait 10 days. There's a 10-day rule in North Carolina when someone dies that if someone doesn't come forward to take responsibility, that after that 10th day, anyone can sign for that. And that was created because of the death of a very famous person's father in this state. Can anybody tell me who that was? Michael Jordan. Because when his father died, he was cremated within several days, and he was deemed a John Doe. So they created the James Jordan Law, and that allowed or gave funeral homes and crematories that had to operate under a 10-day rule. So after those 10 days, anyone, a neighbor, a friend, Good Samaritan, whomever it may be, can sign for disposition rights. So believe it or not, there are 4 things that have to occur when someone is cremated. We first have to wait 24 hours by law. Secondly, we must have a signed death certificate by a physician, nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. Not a certified death certificate, but just a signed death certificate. We also require an identification be done in the funeral home of the deceased or a recent picture provided, and they sign a waiver. And then the 4th aspect is the cremation authorization, and that is what I'm referring to by who signs that, who has the rights of disposition. Normally, if a spouse dies and they have a surviving spouse, it's pretty straightforward. The surviving spouse assigns. If they're children, then again, we have to have the majority of the children sign. And it goes right on down to cousins and spreads out. So it can get pretty complicated, as you see. And sometimes we're on the phone with attorneys more than we want to be. We have a whole group in Houston that we have to call on a regular basis, and even have engaged a local law firm if needed to answer and help us solve some of these dilemmas. But I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having these conversations with your loved ones, because it can become very complicated, and we can't really move forward until these things have been resolved. Those are some of the obstacles we have to overcome that most people never really think about. But that is the reality of how the world has changed. It's a legalistic world, and there are things that we have to deal with. Are there many veterans in this room? If you wish to have, well, thank you first for your service to this country. And we want, when families lose a loved one who's a veteran and they wish to honor them by having some sort of military service or honors, there are several ways that can be done. Very rarely today are full honors rendered, unless they're being buried in Arlington, unless they meet a certain rank, or unless they are they die in battle or engaged in conflict. Most of the time, what they receive are veterans honors, which are 2 to 3 personnel from whichever branch you served, and they will be at normally the place of interment. But if you're cremated and your urn's going to be placed in a columbarium, or maybe your ashes will be scattered, they may do the service in a church or in the funeral home or the place of your choice. But normally it's done at the place of interment. 2 to 3 personnel to simply play taps, fold the flag, which we do get from the government, and then present the flag to the next of kin. But we cannot get that flag, and we cannot engage with the military without a DD-214. And every veteran in this room knows how important that is. That is a very important document, not just for funeral purposes, but anything you need to do in your life as a veteran, whether it's with the VA or receiving benefits in any way. So I encourage veterans to make sure your loved ones know where that document is. I can't tell you how many times we meet with families. It's really important to honor their mom or dad, but they cannot put their hands on that DD-214. And years ago, we had senators and congressmen that we could call on and get that DD-214 probably within about 3 or 4 days. Those days are over. The days of constituent affairs and senators and congressmen really understanding how important that is to its citizens is few and far between. And so, yeah, I think now to go through St. Louis, the records office of the Defense Department takes about, 6 months, 3 to 6 months to get a DD-214. So I impress upon you that if those are your wishes, to please let your loved one know where those things are. So there are lots of things to document. We encourage people to write their own obituary. That's one of the hardest things we see families struggle with, is writing an obituary, summarizing someone's life after many years. So we encourage you to have an active role in that. And sometimes people have their obituary, their photograph, their DD-214, everything, update their addresses. I had a lady years ago, she ordered her headstone except for the death date and kept it under her bed. But I wouldn't go to that extreme, but I do think sometimes planning is very important. Years ago, when I was an apprentice, a man walked in the funeral home, and we were so busy at the time that he had clothes, and I assumed they were for someone that we were dealing with, and he handed them to me, and I said, "May I ask whose clothes these are for?" He said, "Well, Mrs. Jones, and we want you to, dress her in these." So I took them to the back. We used to have this big board that had all the names, and I looked and didn't see Jones. And I said, he must have meant to go to Mitchell Funeral Home, which used to be down the street from us. And I ran out, called him, said, "Sir, we don't have a Mrs. Jones at the funeral home." And he said, "I know you don't. She's at home, but she wants you to hold on to these clothes until she dies." So I said, "Well, if we did that, we would have to devote a whole room to clothing and things that people need at that time. So I don't mean to make light of funerals and death, but sometimes we do have to kind of look back on things and laugh a little bit, because it can be overwhelming. But again, as I've stated, very rewarding. You know, I could talk on about laws and rules and procedures, but a lot of times when I am lucky enough to talk to a group, a lot of people have questions. And so I'd love to answer questions, and sometimes that drives other conversation. So does anybody have anything they'd like to ask me? Yes, sir.
Up until a week or so ago, and I thought the only way you can dispose of a body would be a burial or through the cremation system. But I read an article, it was in a paper or somewhere, it was a green burials. Are you familiar with what that trend is? And can you explain? I couldn't quite figure out what it was in the article.
Well, without going into too much detail, and I see everybody's finished eating, I don't want to be macabre about anything, but we sort of chuckle about green burial because today people think that's something new. Well, trust me, when we started in 1836, most burials were green burial, which means there was no embalming, and people went in a wooden casket and they went in the ground, and there wasn't a burial vault, which is not required by law. That's an outer encasement for a casket, but most cemeteries require those for various reasons. And embalming is not required by law either, and that must be disclosed to a family when a death call is received. But green burial, meaning natural burial, meaning no embalming, wooden casket with no metal normally, no animal glues, or directly into the ground in some green cemeteries. That's one new, well, not new, but a re-emerging method of disposition. The second is called alkaline hydrolysis, or what some people call aquamation. And our state board now has licensed, because the laws that govern cremation also govern alkaline hydrolysis. We had to adopt new rules and laws 3 years ago when we licensed the first hydrolysis operation in Shelby, North Carolina. There are now 3 of them, and it's basically a machine that breaks the body down by water pressure and alkaline and heat. And some believe that the final result is more of someone's remains than, say, cremation, and others believe it leaves less of a carbon footprint. But it is about a 15-hour process. And there actually is a heating element and also reduction of the skeletal remains to the final result, which is given to the family. And then there's also in California, and I think in Oregon, a trend of composition, where the body's put directly into the ground and it's just natural decomposition, composting more or less. In New York also has been licensed, which is very highly regulated. We have not, yes, we do. Oakwood has a green burial section, and we've had green burials there. And there is one in Wake Forest. There's a new one in Chatham County that's been opened. So that's a re-emerging trend. We haven't started the alkaline hydrolysis, but a new facility did just become licensed in Hillsborough called Enswell, I believe. And then there's an operation in Shelby. They have one. And then one in Wilmington, and I understand there are 3 more applications to the board, so it's a growing trend. I guess so. It's about a 15-hour process, so it's a lot longer than the average cremation, which takes about 3 hours. It should. Now, because of the amount of hours it takes and what it takes to meet the final result or of what people need and want. But yes, I would say that cost-wise, the average cremation's anywhere from $1,500 to $4,000 to $5,000, depending on what you choose. As far as urns, flowers, services, the average burial's anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. Now, that is just on the funeral side. If you go into a cemetery, that's a totally separate amount of funds that need to be put aside for that, and that can be prepaid also, but that's separate from your funeral cost. Yes, sir.
Who makes the decision about the disposition of remains, how and where they can be scattered?
There's really not a law about where they can be placed. There is an old law in the books about they can't be scattered less than 2 nautical miles from shore, but no one, I don't know, necessarily enforces that. There are no laws in North Carolina. There are regulations, maybe county code about being a certain distance from a watershed as far as burial of a human body, but as far as scattering or placing of cremated remains, there really are not any laws necessarily. The family makes that decision, and most people on average are either placed in the ground like a casket in a cemetery, or they're placed in a columbarium or memorial garden like they have here at Highland, or they're scattered on private property or in the ocean or wherever someone wants to be. But you know, when it's private property, you need to check with the owner of that property before you go and scatter cremated remains, because they're more significant than most people realize. You have to understand cremated remains are calcium. They are fragmented bone and that have been reduced down mechanically. And so the average weight and consistency is anywhere from 5 to 8 pounds.
What about rivers?
Again, no laws regulating that. But just be careful.
You were talking about attorneys. Most attorneys will know about the difference between power of attorney and then they have to have that second.
Healthcare power of attorney.
So they would know that.
Yes,
bring that
yes.
to their attention.
And healthcare, the majority of the healthcare is for you to make medical decisions for your loved one if they're unable to make theirs. There's just a very small paragraph that goes beyond life and gives that person the right to choose the disposition.
So it's not regular power of attorney.
No, that's a durable or general, and that ceases at death. Yes.
Two questions, one education and one regarding your staff. I think you mentioned investigators. On education, where do you go? Is that part of perhaps get your educational training in the community college system?
Yes.
Do you have to do it in-house or what? How do you, and are there places in North Carolina where you can obtain that education?
Yes.
The second question would be, I heard you say you have 5 investigators.
Yes.
I didn't hear you say that you had any auditors per se. Do you have mandatory audits where you go out and audit the various funeral homes for their entrusted funds and things like that? Is that what investigators do? Or are there areas other than entrusted funds where your investigators become engaged or involved? Thank you.
That's a great questions. Yes, the investigators are auditors. We used to have 2 auditors in addition, that if a funeral home was found to have a lot of bookkeeping errors, the auditors may come in to help them get that cleared up. Or if it became an overwhelming investigation, the auditors would go in to go through those books and go through those files. But the investigators do the audits. Normally, if they came into our funeral home, they'd spend 3 days. They would spend 1 day on the crematory. They'd spend the second day on the funeral home overall, the embalming room, cleanliness, making sure all code is met. The third day, they'd be auditing pre-need files and at-need when a death occurs, making sure they're all in compliance. They go throughout the state in different regions. And then the first part of your first question was about educational requirements. There are 2 licenses. There's funeral directing, which is a 1-year program. Then there's funeral service, which is a 2-year degree. The only mortuary school in North Carolina is through Fayetteville Tech. And then there are many private schools that are throughout the country. Since the University of Cincinnati has a 4-year degree program, it's probably the top program in the country. The one at Gupton Jones in Atlanta, a lot of people attend. I went to Fayetteville, but I commuted back and forth when I was an apprentice. And then you take a national board exam, and then you have to keep up every year a certain number of CE hours. And you can be just an embalmer, but there are only about 11 of those. But it's a 2-year funeral service degree. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Burial at sea.
No, you mean through the Navy?
No. Private.
You know, I've never been asked that, except does the Navy provide that service? And believe it or not, the Navy does provide it. So I'd have to get back to you on that one. I would, there's such a thing, if we transport a deceased across state lines, or if they're flown, we send many people out of state through the airlines. Most commercial airlines, larger planes, have 2 or 3 decedents in the cargo hold that are being taken back to their place of rest. And we have to issue what's called a burial transit permit. And one time I had a man being brought back from Virginia, and he said, well, I'm bringing my wife to Oakwood. I don't need a burial transit permit. I said, well, let me give you a scenario. If you get stopped in Virginia by a state patrolman, and he looks in the back of the vehicle, and whether it's your wife or whoever it may be, you may want to have that burial transit permit with you. Thank y'all very much. Okay.
If you'll sign this book, this is what we donate to the schools. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We appreciate your humor with such a heavy topic, but I do think the principles that you shared earlier, the 3 F's, being friendly, firm, and fair, are very important, especially with those that are grieving. And so thank you for your service. Thank you for serving on the North Carolina Board of Funeral Services to go out and investigate others, to keep everybody fair and honest, and helping those who are most vulnerable. And then thank you for sharing with us about pre-planning. I think if we truly want to honor our family, then we need to pre-plan. It makes it a much easier time for all involved.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hall, thank you. What a great presentation. We appreciate you bringing this to us today. So thank you for bringing and sharing your line of work with us. Yeah. Bill, come back and visit. We'd love to have you again. We were happy to have 5 applications today for membership. Chris, Casey, and I will be working on orientation for Bob, Bill, Roger, Lynn, and Macy. And I think I've left someone out. But anyway, thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful week. Next week, please come back, because we will, and we will have Jeff. No, yeah. So anyway, we hope you come back next week for our program. Is he really? Is he really? Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.